Mungu twaomba uilinde Jumuiya Afrika Mashariki, tuwezeshe kuishi kwa amani, tutimize na malengo yetu. Jumuiya yetu sote tuilinde, tuajibike, tuimarike. Umoja wetu ni nguzo yetu, idumu jumuiya yetu. Uzalendo pia mshikamano viwe msingi wa umoja wetu, na tulinde uhuru na amani, mila zetu na desturi zetu. Jumuiya yetu sote tuilinde, tuajibike, tuimarike. Umoja wetu ni nguzo yetu, idumu jumuiya yetu. Viwandani na hata mashambani, tufanye kazi sote kwa makini, tujitoe kwa hali na mali, tuijenge jumuiya bora. Jumuiya yetu sote tuilinde, tuajibike, tuimarike. Umoja wetu ni nguzo yetu, idumu jumuiya yetu.
Thank you very much, Alan. I'll start by reading up a note from our CEO, Ms. Anya Bera. Inuka recognizes that the analysis of the state of civil society in the region is critical in helping Inuka design strategies and interventions for developing resilience in the sector, and thereby creating vibrant social engagement processes in the region. Inuka Kenya Ni Sisi would like to acknowledge the lead researcher, Maurice Odhiambo, and his assistant, Crispin Nyangwara, both from Kumekucha Africa Consultants, for producing this highly informative report. We thank all the civil society actors in the region who responded to the research questionnaires, attended and participated in focus group discussions, and or gave key informant interviews. It is because of your help that this report was realized. Additionally, Inuka Kenya thanks the Ford Foundation, which supports us in our movement building work. So that is a note from our CEO, Ms. Anya Bera. Today we have a very rich panel. We have with us Professor Collins Odote. Professor Collins is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya with a Doctor of Philosophy in Law from the University of Nairobi. He is currently an advocate, professor of law, and the Associate Dean at the Faculty of Law and Research Director of the Center for Advanced Studies in Environmental Law and Policy, CASELAB, both at the University of Nairobi. He's also an arbitrator and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and a member of the Law Society of Kenya. Professor Odote is currently the chairman of the Council of Legal Education. Professor Odote also serves as the president of the Association of Environmental Law Lectures in Africa, a continental network of scholars focusing on capacity building, research and knowledge exchange amongst universities and lecturers on teaching of environmental law in Africa. His teaching and research interests include governance, elections, land, law, environment, and natural resource management. He links his academic work to policy and governance influence, and in this regard is an accomplished consultant, facilitator, trainer, public speaker, and intellectual. He has consulted for and facilitated high-level meetings for all arms of government at the national and county level and for non-state actors and international organizations. Professor Odote has worked with civil society organizations for decades. He currently serves as the vice chair of Uraia, a national civil society organization focusing on civic education and engagement. So we're very pleased to have you with us, Professor Odote. Karibu sana. On the panel, we also have Mr. Maurice Odhiambo. He's a social rights defender, scholar, writer, and consultant in the areas of human rights and governance based in Nairobi, Kenya. He possesses many years of experience working for local, regional, international organizations. His key areas of consultancy are research, report writing, editing, facilitation, strategic planning, program management, monitoring and evaluation, institutional assessments and capacity buildings, training on various topics such as human rights, governance, advocacy, management of networks and coalitions, coaching and mentoring, among other areas. We're very glad to have you on board, Mr. Maurice Obiambo. Mr. Morris was the consultant who did this report, and he will be giving us a presentation on that. On the panel as well, we have Mwendwa Kivuva, who works at Kiktanet, and he leads the Tatua Digital Resilience Center, which supports social justice organizations in East Africa. The Tatua Digital Resilience Center works to strengthen the digital security and resilience of social justice organizations in the region. He is an experienced ICT practitioner. He has worked in different national and multinational organizations as a network engineer, systems analyst, systems administrator, project manager, and chief technology officer. He has over 15 years of experience in managing information systems and formulating ICT and internet governance policies at the government, private sector, civil society, and multinational level. He has a keen interest in helping organizations in knowledge management, training, implementing management, information systems, and financial planning. He also provides mentorship to the youth and startups. Currently, he heads the operations department at Kiktanet and leads community networks, digital resilience, and several other projects. We also have on the panel Mr. Kamau Ngugi, who is a renowned human rights defender and the executive director at the Defenders Coalition. Also, we have on the panel Justice Rutenge. Justice Rutenge is the executive director of the Foundation for Civil Society based in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. He has over 14 years of experience in development with expertise in results measurement program and strategy design, strategic communication, and resource mobilization. He joined the Foundation for Civil Society in this role on May 1st, 2024, after a decade running a consultancy practice specializing in program and institutional development for local and international organizations. Justice holds a bachelor's degree in integrated community development from Daystar University, master's in media communication and development from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and is currently pursuing a PhD in business and management at Strathmore University Business School. He is an alumnus of the Mandela Washington Fellowship and the Program for Africa Leadership at the LSE. Justice is an avid writer with over 50 published op-eds covering various national and global issues. On the panel as well, we have Zain Abubakar. Zain Abubakar is well known in the East African region, and we are very honored to have him on the panel here today. Zain Abubakar Zain Abubakar is one of the founding directors of the Orature Collective, which combines artistry, activism, and analysis in its facilitation of intellectual work with civic, community, and academic institutions. A committed Pan-Africanist, he has served as a member of the East African Legislative Assembly, where he chaired the Parliamentary Committee, the Regional Affairs and Conflict Resolution Committee, responsible for peace and security in the Eastern Africa region, parliamentary diplomacy and relations of partner states. The committee also had oversight responsibility over the implementation of the African peace and security architecture framework in the East African community. He has extensive experience in governance, human rights, political analysis and strategy, participatory and transformative processes, including a commissioner in People's Commission of Kenya and the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, and the founding director of Kenya's latest civic education and civic engagement institution, Uraia Trust. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can see that we have a very rich panel. And first off, I will invite on the program, Mr. Ngugi Kamau to give a brief presentation on the Protection Hub. Mr. Kamau.
So, thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. I hope you can hear me very well. Thank you for the introductions. My name is Kamau Ngugi, working at the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, popularly known as the Defenders Coalition. So we work to serve the community of human rights defenders, people at the front line, to ensure that they are safe. We are also part of a wider group of organizations and networks that are concerned with the regional aspect of protection of the civic space in East Africa. We are members of what we call the Weaving Resilience, and we take lead in the Protection Hub. The Protection Hub aims at connecting the struggles, connecting people, and ensuring that we enhance their capacity to be safe so that they can also push back on the civic space. So for me, the topic is quite relevant, and I really want to appreciate Inuka and the researchers for the great work that they have done. Reviewing the report basically is such a, it's something that I'm proud that finally we are investing a lot in bringing out the knowledge that we have had for many years as civil society within the South, often relying on what I'll call the international or out of the continent kind of knowledge. But now this is a good beginning whereby we are bringing out the knowledge that we have developed to the world for them to see from our own perspective on the situation that we operate in. The topic on the civic space, of course, being very critical at a time when a lot of people looking at our region differently, on different lens. I know for sure, for those who have followed, for example, the situation in Kenya, in Uganda and Tanzania, they'll say that every turn, every opportunity that comes, the government want to take away on the rights of people, on the right of people to engage on democratic processes. So I think, therefore, it's a duty on us to build our own internal resilience and capacity to counter these attempts to take away these hard-won the spaces that we have at the democratic and human rights level. So for me at this point, I just wanted to introduce myself, and I think we'll take it up from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamau, for that brief introduction of the Protection Hub and for the good work you're doing. Next we have Mr. Mwendwa Kibuva from the ICT Hub. Karibu.
Okay. Thank you, Ines. and thank you for the distinguished panelists in this group. So I'm Mwendwa Kivuva from the Tatua Digital Resilience Center, which is hosted at Kiktanet in Nairobi. So the Tatua Digital Resilience Center offers support, technical support to social justice organizations in East Africa. And we mainly concentrate in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So these are organizations who have ICT-related challenges, cybersecurity challenges, and tech-related challenges. And that's the support we provide them. We partner with organizations from AIRA, Africa Internet Rights Alliance, and we have several of them within the East African region so that they can be able to provide this support in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And within that, we are supporting around 300 CSOs in the region, and we partner with this group also of the Weaving Resilience to also provide the technical support for them. Part of the work we do includes capacity building, which is training and skilling staff from those organizations. And apart from that, we also do audits and assessments of ICT infrastructure for these organizations. And we also do monitoring and advocacy and support on emerging issues like privacy issues, misinformation, disinformation, surveillance, all the emerging issues that come in the ICT space. We also provide tools and resources for the SJOs. So for example, if your organization needs VPNs to be able to, we can be able to support you so that if you want to, your people are at risk of being surveilled by governments or other actors, you can be able to protect yourself. So we provide tools. Apart from that, we also provide advisories on emerging issues, and those advisories can be security advisories that are happening within the region. So that is a brief on the Tatua Digital Resilience Center hosted by Kiktanet. And of course, Kiktanet is a think tank based in Kenya, working in the region, doing research, capacity building, multi-stakeholder engagement, and policy advocacy. And our website is tatua.digital. Thank you, Ines, for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kivuva, for that introduction and the good work that you continue to do in this space. We now welcome Justice Rutenge from Tanzania. Karibu.
Oh, asante sana Eunice, and good morning to everyone. Great to be part of this esteemed group. So my name is Justice Rutenge, as I've been introduced, and I am the Executive Director for Foundation for Civil Society. But also I am the current chair of the steering committee for the Financial Resilience Resource Hub, which I will talk about. So allow me to just present these just 2 slides very quickly to just explain what the Financial Resilience Resource Hub is. So it's made up of 3 organizations, one in Kenya, one in Tanzania, ourselves, and one in Uganda, Kenya Community Development Foundation in Uganda, Foundation for Civil Society in Tanzania, and CSOs and Civ Fund that is based in Uganda. And this hub is really a response to some shocks that happened over the last few.
Another call and silikupigie immediately.
Yes, so it is a response to some of the shocks that happened over the last few years within the development sector, some significant donor exits caused by change in foreign policy by some countries that offer a lot of assistance to our African countries. But then I think the peak of it coming in 2020 with the COVID pandemic also causing a disruption in the sector and causing a significant funding that would have gone to the development sector to be channeled towards pandemic response. And so those shocks really inspired these three organizations under or with the support of Ford Foundation to begin a resource hub that will provide technical and financial resources so that we could advance the capacity of civil society organizations, rather civil society actors in their breadth, to be able to be more resilient, so they can fundraise, they can manage resources, they can grow their own resource base to be able to advance their goals. So really within the resource hub, the financial resilience resource hub, we have 4 strands of work. Our big ambition is to see local indigenous civil society organizations able to generate and build and manage resources sustainably to advance their own social justice goals. And so the 4 strands that guide our work include support to compliance, because we realize that we cannot talk about financial resilience when we're in a state where, for instance, in the case of Tanzania, where the register of NGOs can shut down NGOs basically at will. We had a case where last year in January 2023, you had more than 5,000 organizations, or close to 5,000 organizations, that were suspended by the registrar of NGOs. So we provide support to these organizations to be able to sustain themselves in the sense that protect themselves from being suspended by government. So we offer compliance services, compliance support to these organizations as one of the key strands of our work. But we also do a lot of technical and financial capacity through trainings, through coaching and mentoring, through documentation and sharing of models for financial sustainability. We create platforms and knowledge repositories where these organizations can go and access information on financial sustainability. So that is the second strand of our work. So the third strand of our work is around influencing the way that the aid sector works, so that we have the experiences of flexible funding and locally rooted business models can become more dominant within this sector. So we support philanthropy, we support participatory grant making as a model, an alternative model for funding development. But we're also part of the aid decolonization movement as an effort to be able to influence the way this sector operates. And then finally, the final strand of our work is to ensure that our own hub is better coordinated, and it also has, it attains resilience in a way. So we have initial funding for 5 years from Ford Foundation, but our ambition is to outlive the initial funding that we've received from Ford Foundation. So we, in addition to joint coordination efforts and everything we do to be better coordinated, like the steering committee structure that I talked about, the coordination structure that we have, but we have quite a bit of an ambition in terms of how we engage with other regional and global hubs, but also doing joint fundraising for the hub to ensure that we're able to sustain these activities and the ambitions that we've set for ourselves. So yeah, finally, just very happy to see this report by Inuka. Quite critical aspects to it. For instance, touching on the key factors that diminish the resilience of civil society organizations in East Africa. That we believe will be a very important input to the way that we design our interventions going forward. Asking ourselves around, questions around how do we begin to address some of those issues that have been raised within this report, including the internal divisions, the leadership wrangles, lack of capacity. So quite interested to learn more and to engage around the findings of this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Justice Rutenge, for that presentation and introduction of the work that you do. We are now going to get into the next session where we now usher in Maurice Odhiambo to give us the presentation of the reports. Karibu sana, Maurice.
Thank you, Eunice, and thank you, colleagues, for finding time to be part of this conversation. I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity to make this presentation. So first of all, I will make a presentation. Eunice, I think you may want to clarify for me again what kind of time I have for the presentation, please.
Oh, you have some 10 minutes.
All right, thank you. I really wanted to hear that because we are dealing with a report that is almost 80 pages long, and I will try to summarize. The presentation I got from my assistant has some 30 slides. Obviously, I have a problem there, but I'll try to summarize this. I know that probably people have not had a lot of time to look at the report, and so I'll also take that into consideration as a presentation, and I'll try to pick out some of the very key findings. The value add of this report is actually not so much in the findings, and I think across the region, civic space is closing or is closed. There are several measures of that, even though we probably didn't go deeply into that. So that's an overview, and one can see that through various actions, whether it's government actions through legislation, administrative actions, laws that and regulations that make it difficult for civil society to operate, reporting conditions that seem to be geared towards making it difficult for civil society to comply, and so on and so forth. So I'll take a panoramic view of this so that I utilize well the 10 minutes that I've been given. The report itself is around 6 sessions. The findings are contained largely in section 4 and 5, and then we have the conclusions and recommendations, but it also starts with an executive summary, which kind of summarizes the findings and the recommendations. This report was done before the Public Benefits Organizations Act in Kenya was gazetted, which is a recent development. So we still have elements of asking for advocacy on commencement of the PBO Act. And this is a major development, which you know, if we had done this research after that, obviously some of the findings would have been slightly different. But that is okay, because we know there is still a lot of battles ahead, even though that has been achieved. Let me just put up my presentation, and also, I don't know, I think my colleague Chris was supposed to have been with us, but he has some other engagements. I really have wanted to introduce him because this is teamwork. But yes, maybe in future engagements, he will be able to be part of the process. I'm trying to find my presentation. I know it is somewhere here on the desktop. Oh, yes, it is. So I'll just put that up. Let's see. Yes, there it is. So what we did with Chris is just to put together these slides. Chris was very ambitious. He thought that he would have a lot of time to make the presentation, but so that is it. I will very quickly probably not talk so much about the background, but we know it's about resilience on one hand. So what we were comparing is the situation as it is, the civic space dynamics on one hand, and resilience. So the connection is that we are looking at what is happening in these three countries in terms of the civic space, and bringing out the nuances within that. And we were given a lot of leeway by Inuka to shape the variables and everything. So on one hand, we are looking at those dynamics, and then we are saying, then how has civil society been able to cope with these dynamics, which generally shows a closed trend. And so that is what we were doing. There are some definitions, of course, embedded in the introduction. The problem statement, the objective.
Maurice, if you could make it a slideshow.
Sorry?
So that it becomes easy to view. Make it a slideshow.
I'm very sorry about that. Okay, thank you so much. So that's the broad objective. So specifically, we're examining the state of operating space, investigating the internal factors that increase or diminish. Again, this is the other value addition. I think the innovation that brought in this is to try and distinguish internal and external factors so that there's a wholesome appreciation of resilience. So in terms of methodology, we applied a mixed method approach based on primary and secondary data. We were able to reach out through Kobo Collect. This is an instrument for online data collection at 77 respondents, 34 key informant interviews, 3 FGDs with a total of 24 participants. So a lot of this was really qualitative. In fact, initially, we were more inclined to have a more qualitative study. Then we were able to say, fine, let's put in a survey so that it gives us material and also the comparative aspect, which came up largely through the survey. We noted some general trends. So non-adherence to the rule of law, that's across groups in Uganda being taken to against the rulings of the court. We know here that the TBO Act has not been implemented for over 10 years. Denial of funding of civil society. We know the DGF story in Uganda, which is the most prominent. There are different ways in which some of these things are being done. If you remember the TBO debate in Kenya, we had the amendment that sought to kind of curtail funding to civil society. So that's a trend again that sort of cuts across. In TZ, we have almost similar problems. Some of the administrative challenges. For example, when
Maurice, sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Maurice.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. You keep breaking. I don't know. Maybe move near the mic.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
That you're more audible. Yes.
Internet issues. So yes, as I was saying, so to cut across, as well as restrictive legal and administrative procedures. So there are reporting procedures that are problematic, and especially noted this in regard to Tanzania and Uganda. So multiple layers of reporting, which basically just make it difficult for civil society organizations to comply. So then the failure to comply then is used as as a pretext to frustrate organizations, make them not be able to work. As I said, we investigated a number of variables, and I know it will probably be a little bit difficult to go into all of them given the short time that we have. But if you look at the comparative aspects, there is a lot more hope, if I can put it that way, in Kenya. Kenya's civil society seems to be more hopeful in their own ability to continue expanding the civic space, in their own ability to fight back against closure of civic space than our colleagues in Uganda and Tanzania. And again, the story of the PPO has always presented a mix of resilience and at the same time, weakness on the part of civil society to sustain campaigns, even though, of course, now we know that that problem probably has been resolved to some extent. Now, if you look at some of the responses that Kenyan and Ugandan and the differences coming out. For example, when you ask those, you use the variable CSOs have continuously challenged government actions. You find that 24% of Kenyan CSOs agree with that variable. If you test the same variable in Tanzania, you find that only 5.3% of organizations agree with that variable, meaning that Kenyans find it easier to continuously challenge as opposed to Tanzania. And the Ugandan figures are not very far from what I've said about Tanzania. Another variable which is important, operating environment has been expanding because of CSO activism. You find that 27% of Kenyan CSOs agree with that variable, while just about 6% of Tanzanian CSOs with that variable. Then there seems to be much more hope in Kenya in the civil society's own ability to sustain civic space than you find in Tanzania. Some of the results are presented here. For example, on your extreme left, the operating space has been expanding because of CSO activism, only 5.3%, whereas in Kenya it's about 7%. And Uganda is performing not very differently from Kenya. We really tried to bring out so you can see on this table, for example, when we tested the variable, many CSOs have been silenced by actions of government and are therefore less vocal today than they were previously. Only 17% of CSOs in Kenya agree with that. In Tanzania, in Uganda, it's slightly less than that.
Sorry to interrupt you, Maurice. Maurice, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but people can't hear you clearly. Is there anything you can do to make yourself more audible?
Okay, let me just look at my microphone. Just give me a minute. I think it's probably now the internet which is playing a bit. Let me just change and the Zuku is bringing problems. Let me just change and use my my hotspot.
Okay, as he's doing that, we want to acknowledge you, Salim Ochanjo from Kericho County. Thank you very much for joining us. From Dodoma, we have Badru Juma Rajabu from Restless Development, Tanzania. We have Israel Ilunde from Pwani, Tanzania, at the Youth Country Partnership Countrywide, YPC. Yes, those are the people who have introduced themselves. Thank you very much for joining this virtual launch. We appreciate you. Ready when you are, Maurice.
Thank you.
And maybe also as he's doing that, we can be typing out any questions, comments that we may have on the chat box. You can introduce yourself on the chat box from where you are, so that we also know who is in the room. Thank you very much. Back to you, Maurice.
Thank you. I'm using the Zoom here. So we did a lot of this comparative analysis. I think is really one of the things that for this study, compare this study with past studies. So when we tested different variables as shown on the screen, the first one there is many CSOs have been silenced by actions of government. You can see that Kenyan CSOs are more.
Sorry again to interrupt, Maurice. We can barely hear you.
Okay. Now I don't know. I'm using the laptop. Hello, you can hear me?
No, we can't. We can't hear you.
Okay. Let me.
Yeah, that's better. Stay there.
Okay. Okay. So again, ladies and gentlemen.
Just go back again. We have lost you again.
Okay. Okay. So when the different variables, you can see the way the figures are going. If you're looking at my screen there, so the second one there, green in color, there has been an increase in laws that in our work. That seems to be less affected in Kenya, bigger factor in Uganda, and it's still a significant factor in Tanzania. The last one there is that action taken by government have made it for us to operate. Again, you can see the spread of the how the variables are scoring. I will just move again. If you look of the closing CPS, we see the same trend. So there is no country where civil society is not feeling consequences. Consequences are being felt slightly different in the three countries. So I will pick just one variable here. Let's say for Kenya, the variable that says they have found many ways to continue working, even though the environment has become increasingly challenging. So you find that, sorry, let me pick the variable. They have continuously challenged government action. That is slightly better in terms of comparison. So they have continuously challenged government action that is on their ability to work. So you find that 24% of organizations in Kenya agree with that variable. But when you look at Tanzania on the variable, it then found ways. You see that it is only 10%, 10.5, that says we found different and innovative ways of operating. Whereas in Kenya, it's slightly more than that. So the general trend then seems to suggest, whereas all across the region, there are negative consequences of closing space, these negative consequences are being felt differently And in most cases, Kenya seems to be doing slightly better than Tanzania and Uganda. And I've talked about the comparative analysis. If you look at this variable here, some CSOs have closed down their operations. It seems to be a bigger concern in Uganda compared to Tanzania and Kenya. Tanzania coming at 21.1 and Kenya coming at 12%, which is significantly less than the other two countries. I think I'll try to move a little fast to some of the other variables that we tested. Let me try to see just one of them here. Many advocacy organizations in Uganda have changed their mandate as a way of coping this comes at 21%. And I want to compare them with Kenya. Many advocacy organizations have changed their mandate as a way of coping at 13%. So you can see we are sustaining the same trend with a bit of advantage to Kenyan CSOs as opposed to Uganda and Tanzanian CSOs. Now, we also tested to whether governments are actually acting to improve the situation of civic space. I can tell you that there was less confidence in government actions to improve conditions for CSOs than, say, donors' actions to improve the conditions of CSOs. In other words, there's more faith in the actions of donors to improve the space for civil society than there is on the side of government. And then we also went down to a more nuanced analysis. We looked at the parliament, we looked at the executive, and we looked at the judiciary. And you find that in all those counts, the executive performs very badly because it is the executive that is in charge of the, kind of controlling the civic space. It is the executive that suggests legislation, which then constrict the civic space. It is the executive that imposes administrative measures and so on. But I think the significant finding there is you may score better when you do your advocacy with donors than when you do your advocacy directly with government. Of course, they occupy different spheres. So you are doing advocacy for both, but where do you put a lot of attention? That also speaks to the issue of how is the civic space. So if you go to the more nuanced analysis, then you find issues of donor policies, for example. You find issues of government administrative actions. So all these actors are doing different things in their spaces to either open up or constrict civic space. So if you look at government, you'll see that there's a lot of constriction of civic space. This one is donor policies. So the donors are actually scoring much better compared to government in terms of helping civil society to survive. Now, once we described those dynamics, then we went to the other side, which is basically to look at resilience factors. And we divided these into internal factors and external factors. And this is why I said that is another value addition for this, that we are able to look deeper by separating this into external factors and internal factors. So the very first one of the internal factors is the factors that increase civil society ability to operate. And we found those to be, so within the organization, efficient administration, open communication, leadership is a big deal. And across the region, we kept hearing about leadership. There are organizations that have collapsed because certain leaders left. So that is construed in different ways. Sometimes they say it is because these leaders fail to nurture other leaders. They fail to put in systems and so on. But on the other side, they also say, in certain situations, these leaders don't live in a good way. There's politics around organizations. So when these leaders leave, then the people who are left in the organization are unable to sustain the vision that the leader had. So we had all these internal factors, commitment and passion of the CSO members themselves, even though the membership issue did not come up very, very strongly, because I think across the board, not many organizations are really built on membership, and that is something that we really have to think about, because it also reflects on the legitimacy of the organization. So the fact of being aligned with the constitutional values forms the foundation for effective intervention. These are the internal factors. How we did with these internal and external factors was to test their strength. So we asked the respondents to tell us how significant these internal and external factors are. And if you see the Kenyan CSO saying more than 45% saying significant, slightly less than 35% saying very significant. If you take those two together, you find that these factors are very significant, meaning that any programming around these issues must take into account both internal and external factors. Now, the internal factors that limit resources operate. Limited resources across the board, with the majority of respondents stating that they are facing chronic lack of funding, whatever that means. And productive competition among CSOs, we are really not very able to synergize and build our strength in terms of networking and collaborations and so on. There's a lot of competition for funding. Of course, that comes with the territory. Lack of flexibility responding to community needs, poor relations with some of the major stakeholders. And we know these are governments, these are communities, these are donors, these are regulatory agencies, and so on and so forth. External factors that increase CSO's ability, funding then comes up very, very strongly. Positive relations with donors, often manifested through donor goodwill. Again, relations with regulatory agencies, relations with government, say the state generally, seem to actually score less than relations with donors. Again, in terms of priority, one has to say, so where do you put your advocacy priorities? And which specific strategies then do you use when you are talking to government on the one hand, when you are talking to donors on the other hand? And finally, external factors that reduce CSO's ability to operate. Government interference manifested through punitive laws. We had different donor policies which keep changing and so on and so forth. Political motivations, I think in Uganda, the closure of the DGF was mostly because the president thought that sometime in 2021, when they were heading towards the elections, that funding would actually make an impact on political outcomes when it comes to that election. And so rhetorically, the president was able to link, say that this basket is being used to fund the opposition through civil society organizations. So those are the factors, and we were very careful to just say, what is the significance? But that was an overall question. So unfortunately, we were not able to look at each factor separately, and that can be subject to future studies. But across the board, both internal and external has scored in terms of relevance. And so, as I said initially, the message here is when you're coming up with programs around building resilience, you must look at both the internal and the external factors. And in fact, some people tended to put a lot more emphasis on the internal factors. They're saying that organizations are weak across the board. So we have to strengthen our organization and so on, but also avoid inertia, because some are also saying, you know, when you institutionalize your network so much, you might never move at all. So there is a balancing game there that we really have to play if we want to take advantage and move civil society forward. I will just brush through the recommendations, if you allow me. We were able to speak to civil society and knowledge building, out of which is this research. I know there's a lot of work going on in this. Extremely important. Building, continuous capacity building, training, security. The security issue cuts across the board. It's important. The ability of our networks to react quickly when certain situations arise. Here in Kenya, for the last days, we've had activists being arrested, but because of quick action, they were able to be bailed out and so on and so forth. And that, I think, also is something that our colleagues across the region can also benefit from learning. Defining national and regional responses, again, extremely important. In 2 weeks' time, or I don't know whether it's 1 week time, the East African community, the East African Civil Society Organizations Forum is having this huge convening in Arusha. These spaces, we must occupy them. We must continue to define regional approaches. We must put pressure on the EAC because the regional organizations are also sites for advocacy. So we must put pressure on them. The last year, we were talking about having a common law across the region. So setting common standards, which then can help us try to institutionalize common standards across the region. For organizations in the region, please study what Kenya did with the Public Benefits Organizations Act, even though it is also controversial among certain civil organizations here. But it's a very, very good case study of how civil society can consistently take advocacy steps to rectify the civic space, but also work with the very same government agencies that many times seem to oppose development of wider civic space. So strengthening security, I've talked about that. We must always cultivate support from government officials. That's a standard practice in advocacy. So we cannot run away. We must always try to engage. And in Kenya here, I think historically, society has been when we are engaging actively, say with the opposition on certain common agenda, also with government on certain common agendas. I can say something like climate change. In Kenya now is a very good clutch. In fact, someone should be, I've been very critical of this state-driven tree planting. But civil society should also say this politics. How, you know, what if we instituted our own day of tree planting and mobilize civil society across the country to do that? So that when you go to the table to sit with government, you start by saying, look, we are also encouraging countries or whatever. You get into a non-controversial agenda, push it forward, and thereby create a platform for talking to the other. So diversifying funding sources, again, I'm happy to see that local philanthropy, that conversation is going on. It's very important. We must keep at it. Developing crisis response plans. I think working in security know a lot. For governments, I think continuous conversation, setting up of platforms to talk. We actually don't quite know in Kenya. Maybe someone can tell us what prompted the president 3 weeks ago to announce the commencement of the PBO Act. We need to understand that. But then it's because also partly we have kept it. We've never given up. We've always said that this thing will be without favorable amendment. I think for government, one of the things governments don't do and which can help in CSOs, a lot of these new agendas are agendas that are incubated within CSOs. Even the constitution making agenda in Kenya was incubated within CSOs, or it became an agenda for the state and political parties and other stakeholders. So there are always opportunities to try and guide this conversation towards those ends. For donors, I think more commitment, it means donors acting on their own policies, which are seen. And, you know, even if donors have decided that trade is the way to go, really, we know that there are certain instruments like which bring together business and human rights. So the donors should not then start seeing a dichotomy between trade and human rights. The agenda should be pursued as one continuous agenda. So this idea of flip-flopping all the time makes work difficult for such organizations, and of course building solidarity, building leaders. We know historically the roles that donors sometimes played in terms of building solidarity, of course, without the nuances of the other on their own interests, and so on and so forth. And I think that brings me to the end of the presentation. I would want to just emphasize, Eunice, that across the region, the civic space is threatened, is all those things, and there are other organizations that are able to measure. And you know, one can, if you do your literature review, you can be able to see how those measurements work, and so on and so forth, when you want to do your programming. So there's a lot of literature out there, material out there that can help. We operated this research in fairly minimal resources, so we're not really able to, you know, I guess we could have done better work if I put it in that way. But we adopted ways and mechanisms of making sure that we operate within the limited. For example, using online mechanisms, the Zooms, and so on, which are also more easy. I think in there on the recommendations, there's something on technology. And we can see now that the digital advocacy is gaining ground every day, and that is the direction that many civil society organizations are taking, and it is something that should be encouraged. Eunice, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I give the meeting back to you.
Thank you very much, Maurice, for that very informative session, summary of the report. It's clear that a lot of work was put into it. Now, as we get into plenary, I will invite Zain Abubakar, to just help us with unpacking what Maurice has just shared. Karibu, Bwana Abubakar.
Thank you very much, Eunice. First, let me thank those who are involved in the research and development of this report, but also thank those who facilitated them. And because of the limitations of time, focus mainly on a number of issues that pertains to this report. First and foremost, I think this is an excellent report. It's an excellent contribution to some of the critical aspects that relate to the functioning of civil society, and specifically the closing and closed working spaces and continually assault on the independence, effectiveness, and work of civil society. Secondly, let me add my voice to Maurice, my brother Maurice, in relation to the limitations that they faced in this carrying out this work. So I'm hoping that going into the future, we will address those limitations and avail adequate resources so that we can continue to enhance and better such reports. Thirdly, I think it is important to say that this is a good beginning, but we need to internalize the habit and the necessity of carrying out such reviews, then and using the findings, evidence-based findings, to improve both external and internal factors that limit the work of civil society as presented in the report. Further, let me suggest that we could consider that such reports are done periodically, so that it's a good start, but we can now start thinking, should we do it yearly or biannually, or what period of time is required in between in order to do this? And then connected to this, the dissemination today and the launch is a good start, but as you could tell, those who are listening keenly, with all the communication challenges that we're facing, that this report required dissemination and action. So since they said that part of the methodological background that they used was action research, that means the findings need to be worked on, and they can be used to enhance both internal and external capacity building needs, so that the sector grows in a way that it is also able to respond and to work with the people of the East African region. I also, as part of that limitation, understand that this report only covers the 3 founding members of the East African community. In future, we should also consider expanding this report for it to be truly an East African effort, to be able to cover the other members of the East African community, and possibly even reach out to the wider civil society in the continent and globally. But let me spend a bit of time on some of the things that we may want to examine further and interrogate further, but also reflect on in relation to what this report presents. Number one, you will see that the report admittedly says that it used mainly what we may call liberal democracy lenses. Now, I would like to suggest that we need to take care of the limitations of liberal democracy in its application in the continent, but globally. And I would like to suggest that there are some arena or sites of struggle in the East African community undertaken by civil society actors that will not be fully appreciated or analyzed if we limit ourselves to the liberal democracy lenses. Let me give you a few examples. So we have, for example, people working ideologically and also using transformative more methodologies that transcends liberal democracy. One example is if you use Kenya, for example, we have what people have argued is what you call a transformative constitution. And a transformative constitution goes beyond the limitations of liberal democracy and addresses issues of social justice, issues of, I can see somebody saying that they have break. So I've taken off the video so that we can have a wider bandwidth. But I was just saying that if you use the Kenyan Constitution as a transformative document, it transcends liberal democracy ideas and get into sovereignty of the people, get into social justice, get into collective or group rights, get into socio-economic rights as basic needs as well as basic rights, and so on and so forth. I can go on and on. But we also have to understand that there are other people working in sites and arenas of struggle that use methodologies that are beyond liberal democracy. The other two examples I would like to give is actually three. One is in relation to the question of, for example, food sovereignty. So those who work in transformative and more ideological leaning work around food, they work on food sovereignty. But those who use the lens of liberal democracy mainly either use food security lenses or food availability lenses. If you go on the environment, those who work more robustly with the environment work on what you may call environmental justice principles and methodologies. But those who use the liberal democracy lenses will stop at climate change, issues relating to transition, issues relating to financing, but they will never hardly deal with the question of where are we, why are we at the place we are in first, and the question of historical injustices related to that. The same thing also with extractive industries. So on that question, I think I don't want to belabor the point, but I think we need to use other lenses than just liberal democracy. Secondly, I think we need to address the questions of risks and assault on democratic space and the confining of the sector of civil society on the question of sponsored non-state actors. This is a growing phenomenon in our region, that sometimes the state and government agencies don't want to do the dirty work, and they sponsor people in either fringe, what you may call fringe people who want to claim the space of civil society, or people who don't say even they are part of civil society, but they attack civil society and contribute in the reduction of the space, both in terms of closed spaces and also closing spaces. But we also need to also address the question of what you may call colluding funding mechanisms. There are some funding mechanisms now which have clearly made a decision to work with the government. So even the framework under which civil society is funded becomes part of the country's agreed framework between the donors and the governments. And in Kenya, we saw that that became a norm under the Mwai Kibaki administration, and it contributed negatively in terms of confining that space. We also need to consider learning from our past. This region comes from a legacy of struggle against injustice, against oppression of people. And if you look at what we can learn from our forebears, for example, those who struggle against colonialism, you can find a lot of important lessons from that. So, for example, one of the area that is crying out for expansion and intervention is the labor movement. Workers became an important foundation for struggle during the independence struggle and post-independence struggle. But now we have allowed the state and governments to capture the workers' space. So one of the trending issue in all the three countries is the movement, the labor movement, and the association of workers have either been captured or compromised or co-opted by state functionaries. And as long as you leave that space to the state functions and functionaries, we will be missing a great opportunity to transform the lives of the people. The other one is livelihood-based workers, farmers, for instance. And many a time we do not align ourselves to those sectors. The last three things that I would like to mention is one, if we can, I agree with the report and recommendation, if we can expand regional mobilization and organization and using regional instruments. I'll give you two examples. One, how to use, for example, strategic litigation consistently and in a coordinated version, to use the East African Court of Justice or the African Court. Secondly, using the East African Legislative Assembly and putting pressure on these two institutions. And the reason why I raise these two institutions is because they are relatively the ones that are supposed to be relatively autonomous from the executive reach within the architecture of the East African Community Treaty. So if we could expand, there's room for expansion in the East African Court of Justice and its mandate, and the same for the East African Legislative Assembly. And also to start championing, like the other day, African Union lawyers, PALU, the Pan-African Union lawyers, with others, were talking about the potential of the new architecture of the Pan-African Parliament. And the only thing that is holding that back is the ratification process. Secondly, I would like to us to start considering enhancing cooperation between countries and specifically providing safe spaces for continuous struggle outside state boundaries. So if you think that there are things that can be done in terms of intervention, but outside Kenya or outside Tanzania or outside Uganda, either held within these countries or outside in other African countries, including a dual registration. You could register an organization in Dar es Salaam and Accra, or Dar es Salaam and a town in South Africa. So we look at spaces that are comparatively allowing for robust work of civil society and do joint registration, but also do joint For example, you can run a radio station or television station outside one of those countries. And then lastly, to consider that in all this, there are certain fundamentals that are interrelated. One of them is the elections cycle within these countries. And you would see that the closer you come to an election, the more pressure civil society receives. So we need to start strategically intervening much earlier and making the agenda or setting the agenda for an electoral cycle much earlier, so that by the time some of these states either start to block you, there is also time to push back and resist. Why am I raising the question of elections? Because there is a trajectory of rigging of elections, including the foreign interference in local elections or country elections by foreigners. And this works again within that limitations of taking a liberal democracy approach. And then lastly, I think the and the idea of working together in function is absolutely important as articulated in this report. Let me finish by thanking you all for your kind attention. Thank you very much. Back to you, Eunice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zain Abubakar. I now want to take a couple of questions. Maurice, you can note the questions, and maybe Zain and any other panelists can help in responding to this. Zipporah Marigi wants to know, does this report consider the challenges organizations are facing in attending Global South engagements due to resource limitations and challenges in accessing visas? If so, how do we move forward to ensure that there is inclusivity? The other question is, when we are talking of inclusivity, has this report also addressed the free participation young people are subjected to when attending Global South and also local engagements? Young people are being given opportunities to participate in these forums and be part of panelists to further their advocacy, but they are subjected to take part in the panels without any compensation. This is all about discrimination, being that the invited panelists are young people and women. And the third question is, the people cascading should reach even grassroots organizations and not just the bigger ones. Kindly give strategies of reaching the grassroots organizations in a meaningful way. Thank you very much, Zipporah, for your questions. We'll invite Maurice to just respond to those and speak to those. Karibu, Maurice.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I think my system was becoming again. Questions?
Maurice, we can't hear you.
And thank you for the questions, but first to thank Zain for those very elaborate. I hope I'm being heard a little better. I see Aaron is. Eunice, am I more clearer now?
Now you are. If you stay where you are right now, we will continue hearing you.
Thank you. I will try not to move even 1 centimeter. Anyhow, so thanks a lot, Zain, for I think what give us a lot of very positive ideas which should be pursued, and also put emphasis on certain actions like the regional mobilization. I agree, Zain, that we haven't done even 1/10 region. The recent the region, our Secretary General who just met did not quite understand for his leadership tended to move us backwards. And one of the things we are going to do in Arusha is really to reiterate that this is our space. The East African community is our space. It's an advocacy space, and we must therefore do things that then change. I think on the elections, that we had to be very nuanced about, because people described some of the collaborative engagements across the region, but they were also asking us the question, if you reveal some of these things we have been doing together, wouldn't that then endanger the space? We were a bit caught up in that, and so there are 10 details of our conversations that we tried not to bring out too loudly, because that we were being cautioned by the people we were talking to themselves. I think all the other points are well taken. Thank you. What I consider to be an ideological discussion, this tension between liberal democracy and other forms of democracy, social democracy, and so on. And as a researcher and a writer, I can say from the word go, some things are imposed on you by the framing of the study, the initial framing. And what we did, therefore, was actually to point out the limitations of the liberal democracy theory in terms of discussing civil society. And I'm happy that that is able to bring up the conversation that is required. If I go to Zipporah's questions, I must say I didn't hear them fully well. Does the report consider the issue of resource challenges? Actually, I don't think I got that too well. And the questions of inclusivity, yes, it does. And that touches on, for example, the kind of projects that you get. You may suffer because of donor policies. You may suffer certain limitations because of your own internal dynamics. What are your Are you taking into consideration? Are you taking into considerations questions of equality? Are you gender? So basically what we are saying is, if you have a variable like you find that it is influenced by these very dynamics that we are talking. Sometimes you find organizations that exist, organizations that exist only, they say, women-led or activities that. So within those nuances are where the questions you're asking are. So there's a that needs to be done, building needs to be done, so that whenever I go out to mobilize, whenever I go out to build, to help grassroots formations to build their capacity, what messages am I passing? Am I also saying that they should not disregard the negative influences of patriarchy, for example? Am I passing those messages? Am I having a conversation around some of those priorities? which in Kenya, for example, are constitutional. So we must pay attention to them. So you asked the question about young people, excuse me, and also reaching out to grassroots organizations. I think for the study, we tried very much. I can tell this meeting that because of my own awareness of the region, I was able to actually reach out to people beyond the capitals. You know what that means for a study of this nature. Many studies don't go beyond Nairobi if it is here. So we really tried. One of the most productive interviews I had was with a colleague in Vihiga, an activist whom I've known for many years. And you can't believe the quality of information and in regard to counties and how counties are also basically repressing civil society. I hope I've touched on the main issue. Back to you.
Yes, you have. And I'll very briefly request, in the interest of time, I know people have scheduled other meetings at 12. I'll just quickly read through a couple of more questions that you can give brief responses to. Does this report speak to the LGBTQ agenda, and how is this now intrinsically being tied to the CSO engagement and even funding for those that reject it? There are threats of defunding. Does the report look into how such funding affects our respective countries' social fabric and what it means for the future? What is your take after observed results between Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania? What are the issues that were particularly happening different in Tanzania and Uganda compared to Kenya, which we are seeing the statistics to be better off compared to the two? And finally, they would be interested to know what were the areas of capacity building specifically that were suggested that would best help to improve issues that we are facing with the dynamics happening in the civic space, as this is highlighted among the recommendations. If you could briefly respond to those.
Thank you again, Eunice, and thanks for those questions. I will straight away go to the first one. So I think not specifically in terms of different segments, if I may call it that way, or different interests within. So the framing of the research was, let me use the word panoramic. So we're looking at civil society as a block, as a whole. So, and I guess one limitation that we were not able to have a very nuanced interaction with different groups so that they bring out different issues. And that's really just because of the limitations of the study. So it is not that a study was opposed to doing that. That is why on the question of youth, I more or less said the same thing. We didn't have specific questions interrogating the place of youth within the civil society space. Number two, what are the issues? So how are things happening differently across the region? I could just say a few, and it touches on the comparative aspect. Now, let me say I'm an NGO in Kenya right now, registered as a national NGO. There is no one who is going to ask me if I go to Mombasa to produce a license, an authorization, whatever that is. Now, that's different for Ghana because there are different layers of
You're a little lost. Go back to where you were, Maurice.
Yes. Sorry about that. So on the question of what is happening differently, so I was giving the example of an NGO registered in Kenya as a national NGO will not require any authorization to work at the county level which seems to be different for Tanzania and Uganda. Now, the same applies to reporting. You also see different layers of reporting for our community in Uganda, our community in Tanzania. You
Maurice,
see
we're losing you.
yes. Eunice?
We seem to be losing you. If you could just, yeah, we seem to be losing you.
I'm
If you could
changing the
just
angle
move
a
near your
little
mic.
bit. Yes, yes. Is it
Just
better?
speak, yeah, if you speak close to the mic, we will not lose you.
Okay, okay. So I was basically just saying that there are those nuances. So when you dig deeper, you find that the administrative procedures that are there in Uganda and Tanzania, when it comes to reporting, when it comes to, for example, there are certain amounts of money you receive in Tanzania, and you are supposed to make some disclosure. So some of those things, for example, do not apply to Kenya. My first example is that if an organization is registered as a national organization in Kenya, and you are not going to be asked, why are you here? Your coverage is national. That does not seem to apply to the other countries. I do not know what I would say about the closure of the PGF in Uganda. Is an example of how government can interfere with civil society funding. Now, I don't know whether there's something I can relate with that. I know we've had issues in.
Okay, Maurice, we have lost you again.
Am I better now? I'm just switching
Yeah,
a little bit. Am I better now?
Now, when you're there, please don't move from there. Yeah.
Okay. Let me talk about the PBO Act. And I said the other countries need to really study the process through which we came up with the PBO Act. And I'm very happy that we have colleagues here who are very central to that effort. Collaborating with government. There are many, many lessons that we can share in terms of government collaboration. And we know that some things may not apply. But you see, when you sit together, you can say, okay, this one can work for us. This other one may not work for us, and so on. But there are lessons there. So I've seen this even in our regional organized. Kenya has the strongest chapter now of the East African Civil Society Organizations Forum. We sit with government every day. It's not that government likes us, but it is the approach, it is the tactics, it is the strategy that we apply to build that relationship. So cross-learning, we need to learn from each other what works, what doesn't work. When you guys are doing your programming, I think it's good to still sit with organizations and have, this kind of conversations. Specific areas of capacity building, sort of just to build on the weaknesses that we have pointed out, administrative, managerial weaknesses within civil society organizations. So you know what to do about that. I don't know how the space for capacity building looks like. I used to teach at the Danish facility in Arusha. I know we did a lot of good work there. I know there's a facility here by Amref International. I know there's a lot of good work going there. Our own formations, our own security formations. I know there's a lot of training on security that is going on. I think when our colleague from the foundations, the local philanthropy spoke, maybe I didn't hear him talking about capacity building.
Maurice, sorry to interrupt. I'll ask you to wrap up because we're running out of time.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of areas of capacity building, the ones I've mentioned are just a few. In the report, you can still find them. And one thing I want to say, when you're reading the report, please read it as a whole. It's apply a systems approach. the recommendations may not even be where you find all your actions. Read the literature review. There's a lot of information there that can tell you what is going on, where the priorities are, and so on. Read the introduction. Reflect on what Zane spoke about, the framing of our research, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maurice. I'll now invite Professor Collins Odote to give his remarks and officially launch the report. Karibu sana, Professor.
Thank you very much, Eunice, colleagues, the Executive Director of Inuka Kenya Ni Sisi, Anya Bera, other staff of Inuka, fellow colleagues from within the region. A very good afternoon. No, it's still good morning. Good morning to all of you. I was requested by Inuka to just say one or two things as we launch the report on recasting advocacy, civic space dynamics in East Africa. As people who have spoken before me have already indicated, I think both Maurice Odhiambo, who I know for very many years, Zain Abubakar, who also know for very many years, have all indicated this is a very topical publication, extremely topical, both for the developments in the region, but also topical just coming a few weeks after the government of the Republic of Kenya commenced the Public Benefit Organization, an act that has been in the works for very long, and people almost gave up on it being operationalized. And that was operationalized, as Maurice said, just a few days after the report was completed. Therefore, you'll see that the report still speaks as if the act hasn't been operationalized. Now it has. But the report also raises several issues on civic space in the region, showing the space as half open, but showing that the space is quickly closing. This is a huge concern for everybody who cares about democratization, who cares about livelihoods, and who cares about citizenship in the region. Because we are a region that faces very many democratic challenges, and both old and new ones. And as the report demonstrates, there are a lot of challenges that continue to face civil society. Allow me, though, not to speak on the content of the report, because that has now been discussed very ably by Maurice, who was the author, and also several other complementary issues raised by Abubakar in his discussions. Allow me instead to raise a few issues that I think are important for us to think about. I think issue number one is that this report is cast in the context of the East Africa, and requires us to ask ourselves several things. Number one, why East Africa? And what is it that civil society within the region share in common beyond boundaries? I think we need to take much more seriously the sentiments by Zain Abubakar about the East African community, because the East African community provides us with a galvanizing voice within which to not only assess the state of civic space, but also to use that space or to use our energies to open that space much more effectively. Therefore, the conversations that Maurice raised just 2 minutes ago on the East African Civil Society Forum is one we need to pay particular attention to, not just in implementing the report, but in terms of our engagements into the future. I think we also need to pay attention to the East African Dialogue Forum. That is an opportunity for engaging with the East African Secretariat and ask ourselves, what's the health of the East African community? If I read, I think, this week's newspapers, you hear that the community cannot be able to meet because member states have not been able to pay their contributions. What does that mean for our engagement with the community? Does the community hold the promise that it helped several years ago? So that our engagement on the civic space is not just about national development, but also the region. The second issue, and Abubakar spoke to this, is the need for us to be able to move beyond the 3 traditional members of the East African community, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and to move to the other new members, because the region is expanding and expanding very exponentially. Do we still have a shared ideal? Are we clear about the state of civic space in the other countries, because those other countries are now more than the three that we've spoken about. They're actually the majority. So we need to think about them as part of that engagement. I think the third is for us to be able to increasingly start engaging as civil society beyond our national boundaries. I have in mind, for example, work that was done by the Kenya Human Rights Commission a few years ago through the Tanzanian Election Watch when they observed the Tanzanian elections. Are we able to transcend national engagements and to be able to engage in what is happening in the civic space beyond our countries? Because then you're able to provide support to our colleagues. I think the fourth issue that for me I think is critical as we launch this report is to think about the state of constitutionalism in the region and to be able to track that as part of the civic space. Several years ago, Kituo cha Katiba used to have the annual state of constitutionalism. Zain recommended, and I support, that into the future we should make such kind of publications and annual events so that we have a baseline and we're able to track progress so we know, are we regressing or are we progressing? And whatever answer we give, against what benchmarks? Is it against the heart or against a trend that we can be able to see every year? I think that would be extremely useful. Turning to the other side, because the report speaks about two things. It talks about the state of civic space, but also talks about resilience. Resilience is ably defined in the report. From my background in environmental law, it's also about being able to adapt, being able to respond to challenging situations. But I think we need to move beyond resilience to thriving and to influence. We need to ensure we are not just being resilient, we're not just coping with the situation, but we're trying to change that situation. That requires that some of the tools that we used in the 90s must give way to those of the 2020s. Tools that are much more technologically savvy, tools that focus on that we have a much younger sector. We have a sector that focuses much more on social media, but we also have a government that deals with things differently than it did in the 90s. The outcomes may be the same, but the approaches may be different. That requires, as Chinua says, that because man has learned to shoot without missing, the bird must also learn to fly without perching. That's a message that we need to take into account. Beyond the publication as we launch it today, how do we enhance the voice and urgency of the sector? How do we use this report to create much more impact? I think it's important for us to be much more innovative. I think it's important for us to also move into new areas, questions about climate justice. I think it's important for us to be able to engage in much more thought pieces. I think it's important for us to engage with the media much more. The work that Inuka has on the elephant must be expanded. I think it's our duty to ensure that we make this report our galvanizing point for action so that we are able to prevent the closing of the space, and where it's been closed, we are able to open it. Whether we are opening windows, whether we are opening panya routes, we must open ways to enable us get back to the door and to enable us have much more influence. With those very, very many remarks, it is my pleasant duty to declare the report on civic space in East Africa officially launched, and to thank Inuka for convening us and for doing this topical work, and also to thank Ford Foundation. My friend Linda Ochiel was supposed to be here, but is unable to be here, but thank Ford Foundation for supporting Inuka in this work. Thank you very much, and do have yourself a very good afternoon now, because it's 1 minute past 12. Thank you, Eunice, and over back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Collins. Thank you, Mr. Zain Abubakar. Thank you, Maurice. Thank you, Justice Rutenge. Thank you, Kamau Ngugi. Thank you, Mwendo Kivuva. And to all our participants, we thank you very much for patiently listening in. Thank you for your valuable questions and for taking time to be part of this this launch of this virtual report. We are very, very honored to have had you, and we do not take it for granted. So I have shared on the link where you can access the report on our website. I have shared the link in chat to everyone. If you have further questions, you may also reach out to us through our website, or you can send a direct message to info@inukakenya.co.ke. Otherwise, without further ado, I will like to say that we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. God bless you.